Welcome, AXA family and friends, to Common Purpose, Uncommon Times. As always, honored to be here. I'm Wes Smith, the Executive Director of AXA. Um, Thank you for everything you're doing right now in these crazy, uncommon times. This last week, we had a chance to reconnect with a lot of our membership at the Leadership Assembly. Uh, who knew that we'd be able rather to conduct the Leadership Assembly virtually? Years ago, we talked about trying it. We thought there's no way we could pull that off. And now we've done it twice. We've had our Leadership Assembly with folks voting, um, approving candidates, ledge policy, positions, et cetera, et cetera. And it's working. Like all of you, we're figuring out ways to make it work. And I'll tell you, it's going to make us better in the future. We're going to be able to connect people when sometimes we've been geographically limited. We couldn't always get people together, and now we have no excuse. We've shown we can do it. We had a great 3 days last week at the assembly. We had some really, really powerful conversations and trainings. You'll probably remember Dr. Cantor, who was on this show. Our assembly members thought it'd be great to get her there in front of them, talking about adult self-care, and about some of the things that she shared with all of us about the importance of the 3 R's and building the social emotional wealth and capital of our young people. She talked about her relationships, routines, and resilience. She talked about the need for all of you, to the extent that you can, to get the rest that you need, also to build relationships that help with those connections for you. She was just amazing. Toby Scruggs did some great work on equity, really helped us unpack that. It was just a great assembly. And so for all of you who were able to attend, thank you for being there and giving up your time to govern this association and continue to ensure that we're meeting the diverse needs of our members as they support California's 6.3 million students. Speaking of our members and our regions, I'd give a shout out to Region 15. As I said, I will shamelessly promote any of your regions if you send me a shirt. So tonight it's Regions 15 and their Building Bridges region shirt. So Region 15, thank you for that. This week you can expect some policy updates. Remember, don't forget to tune into our AXA legislative brunch, or lunch rather, on Wednesdays. This week we'll get some updates from Edgar and the team. Some of the things I might talk about are the new testing protocols that are being discussed. We continue to advocate strongly that while we need testing at the local level for all of you, for your employees, we aren't the people to figure out how to provide that testing. We're not doctors. We're not collection agencies. We don't do transportation of these things. And we'll have to work with our labor partners to figure it out. And there might be a better solution than that. Maybe a comprehensive solution for not only getting a discount on the testing, which we certainly applaud the governor for, but also how do we pull it off in the short amount of time that we have to turn this around. And so we'll continue to advocate for that on your behalf. We know that CDPH guidelines are rumored to be coming out around high school sports and other activities. And on this show, we've talked about the importance of student engagement and how those co and extracurricular activities do just that. And so we look forward to those guidelines this week, and I'm sure they'll be able to report as soon as they come out. We're hearing about a second spike, not only in the state of California, but in the world. And so what does that mean for all of you? On this week's campus tour, we'll be able to hear from Roger Stock and Rockland Unified to talk about being nimble and how when you have plans and the data changes, you have to adjust those plans. They've had a lot of experience with this, and he's been a courageous leader during this process of adjusting and dealing. But we'll have that this week on our AXA campus tour. I want to also make sure that folks know that Leadership Summit, you're able to register now for Leadership Summit. We have over 50 pre-recorded workshops, as well as hours and hours of live content from November 2nd through the 10th. It's going to be amazing. And so be there. As I say, plenty of great seats available. The team will put a link in there for you to use. But tonight, really excited. We've heard from our members, elementary, secondary. We've heard from classified leaders. We've heard from experts in the field, the governor's office, experts in mental health and trauma. We've heard from students recently. We've heard from parents recently. And we've talked a lot about the importance of labor management relationships, and that the only way we get through this, and we will, but the only way we do it is together, working together. We've talked about shared decision-making, co-leadership, all those concepts that we know really foster the necessary and appropriate relationships for us to get this done. But we haven't had labor on yet. But tonight I'm excited because we've got representatives from the California Labor Management Initiative here to talk about what they're hearing, what they're seeing that's working. So without further ado, let me welcome to the show Ed Honowitz and Gustavo Morales, two friends. We've worked together. I work, just full disclosure, I'm biased. I think highly of the California Labor Management Initiative, and I'm on the steering committee for it. So it'd be odd if I didn't. I'd be criticizing myself, which I do from time to time, but not in this instance. But they also work for the CDE Foundation, work with for the CDE Foundation. And so in a minute, I want them to explain each and what they do. And I just want to call out Jessica Howard, their CEO, that she didn't join me tonight. She's not on here. And so the next time we do this, she's gonna have to jump on and be a part of it. I miss seeing her also. But gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for being here. Tell our audience a bit more about what the CDE Foundation does, and in particular, the California Labor Management Initiative. And Ed, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Wes. Really a pleasure to be here with you, to have an opportunity to reach more AXA members. And let me give folks a little background if you're not familiar with the CDE Foundation and the Labor Management Initiative. The CDE Foundation is a nonprofit that was, we're about 8 years old, and we were initially created kind of as a fiscal receiver for the California Department of Education to receive foundation grants. We currently continue in that role, but we also have a number of projects that we operate, one of which is the California Labor Management Initiative. And so I want to take us back a little bit to where California LMI started. The Labor Management Initiative kicked off in 2015 with our very first convening. And Wes, I think you were there among other state association leaders and state superintendent at the time, et cetera. All of that, though, was preceded by a lot of conversation between AXA and CTA and CSBA and others about, was this even possible? Could somebody come and bring these groups together? And is there really a role? Is this, viable? And after a lot of, challenging conversations, in part, it became clear that, there was a need for this. So since that initial 2015 convening, we've been engaged with about 170 districts and county offices, their labor management teams around the state. When we, engage with folks, we generally ask them to bring a labor management team, right? So this isn't just about, just the union leader or just the superintendent showing up. We want them to interact and come as a team, both classified and certificated unions, board members, and senior administration.
Yeah, Gustavo, welcome to you as well. You want to add anything, your insights for the audience to better understand what it is each of you do and what the foundation does?
Yeah, so thanks for having us again. So the goal of the California Labor Management Initiative is really to convene labor management teams composed of administrators, certificated, classified, and other district leaders to really learn about research, best practices, and approaches to building a labor management team. We really have seen from research that if you build a solid labor management team, you have increased teacher retention, you have increased student achievement, and you have increased sharing of best practices. So we really learned a lot from ABC Unified, in fact, really about what it is and what it's about, finding ways to work together, and what it's not. It's not a place to really substitute collective bargaining. So what we try to do is we really try to convene teams to be able to work on not only how to build structures, but how to build trust and how to talk to each other outside of collective bargaining items.
No, that's huge. I really appreciate that that clarification, because I think people were nervous in the beginning. Was this some way to influence negotiations or to try to leverage one side against the other? Two stories. One specifically about that. I got a bunch of calls when the first meeting that Ed that you mentioned was announced, and they're like, "Hey, have you heard of this labor management initiative, and should I trust it?" And I said, well, I think you should, because AXA's helping to set it up and design it. We haven't done it yet, so we don't know how it's going to go. But I can tell you the intentions are pure, that people really are trying to come together and say, how do we do the work necessary to across the state have these high performing, high functioning collaborative teams? And so let's give it a chance. But it was amazing how many calls I got. And then the second one, totally unrelated, but it still makes me chuckle a bit. Joe Boyd, who is the executive director of CTA, who I said on the show many times, I like quite a bit. I really, really enjoy him. He and I met at the very, very first Labor Management Initiative meeting when he was doing some other work. And so now that he's at CTA, we laugh, and I'm like, I'm sure glad I didn't piss you off when I met you at that event, because our relationship's important. He goes, no, it was a great meeting. I had a lot of fun with you. Relationships matter, right? You never know who you're meeting and when that's going to come back to you. But anyway, great event. Really, really grateful for it. Hey, let's talk now about what you were hearing, what you've heard. As I said in the intro, I get to hear from administrators. I get to hear their take on what they're hearing from labor. You work with both. So just some things you heard so you can help our folks put the pieces together as we figure out how to move forward and do this work. But Gustavo, I'm going to start with you. When we look back at the spring, no one was prepared to have schools close. Certainly not for any length of time. We had to make tough decisions. We had to figure out this distance learning thing on the fly. The governor came out with executive orders weekly. The 4 pillars required that we fed people, right? That we educated, high quality education, that we paid people, right? And so it was fast and furious. And then the labor management framework came out that was supposed to help. A lot of people said it had no chance of helping, but and I think data probably proves that out. So help us. What did you hear people were saying from the labor side in the spring, summer? What did we learn then?
Yeah, and to be quite frank, we didn't hear anything right away, because as superintendents and other district leaders went into action, they really didn't call Ed and I. It's really when the teams really started to mobilize. Instead, we heard from the state superintendent saying, hey, we have to be able to build something for teams to be able to use, and some kind of joint communication. When the dust started to clear a tiny bit, we started hearing the same things you probably heard: PPE, MOUs, safety. But one of the things that really rose up to the top for us was really around mental and social emotional needs of students and staff. How do we really come together and collaborate and really partner up to really not only meet the safety needs, but also meet the social emotional needs of staff that are going through this individually, not only at the school site level, but in their home? How do we ensure that those needs are met, and how do we bring resources equitably for them? So when we heard that, we thought, in what ways can we really build out these standout examples in order for us to provide those both at our convenings, just basically sharing over our e-blast, and so that was our primary goal, in order to help teams that were initially mobilizing, really bringing those social emotional needs. And then we found that, teams were being super agile. We got directions left and right from not only state associations and the CDE, but we also weren't really sure what everything was. We weren't sure what COVID was. We weren't sure how we were supposed to proceed. And 2 weeks turned into 4 weeks, turned into 8 weeks. So I think for us, we really saw, how do we help teams become agile through the reopening and closing of schools?
Yeah, Gustavo, thank you. Ed, you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, I think, initially a lot of folks, on both labor and the management side really thought, okay, so it looks like we're going to close maybe through spring break. And when spring break is done, all right, we're back at it. The world returns to normal somehow. I think, obviously people didn't know quite what to do. There is no playbook for this. There isn't, I think as one of our colleagues at Monterey County Office of Education said, there's no administrator, anywhere that took a course on how to operate through a pandemic and how to deal with this. And so, part of what this looked like, there was an initial sort of real concern on the part of labor around, PPE. How do we keep our members safe? How do we, ensure that, folks that are going to be out there, particularly on the classified side, because they're, for the most part, educators, teachers were like, yeah, of course, we want to keep, reaching out and connecting with our kids. But it was the classified staff that was kind of on the front lines. Hey, you got to go out there and start handing out food like tomorrow, right?
Right.
And so, there was no playbook. Everyone was improvising and, trying to sort of do what they felt their role required. We saw places that, they were able to just work together and they didn't need to do an MOU because they had just figured it out on the fly. Other places said, we want to have an MOU that we're going to negotiate and it's going to cover, on the week of, April 21st, we're going to do this. And the following week, we're going to do that. Other people put together like really simple kinds of, side letters. There was no sort of standardized approach because nobody had ever dealt with this before.
You bet. Yeah, and I'll tell you, while there is no silver bullet, and we'll get to that in a second, just, typically relationships, what I saw, and I'm sure both of you saw this as well, where people had these collaborative, trusting relationships. They were able to navigate those nuances, right? The changes, everything that was coming at them. I mean, and not perfectly, because none of our solutions are perfect in a pandemic, but the relationship, the folks that had those, that really carried the day from my perspective. I'm sure from yours also. And I'll say something else. When I mentioned the labor management framework, you both smiled. I have a different response when I think about it, because the labor management, we were all behind the scenes trying to work this thing out, and it was challenging. And I think where it fell short was in people trying to use it for negotiations, which is what you said you don't do. And I think that's brilliant. That's the reason I bring it up. You work on those things that certainly improve negotiations, trust, confidence, relationships, all of that. But a framework used as a lever at the table was not the use for it. And I think that's why people walked away from it with kind of a bad taste in their mouth. I want to move to reopening. We couldn't plan for what happened in the spring. Some would argue, for political reasons, we could have known sooner that something was coming, but really what was going to happen and what that meant, impossible to be prepared. But all summer we've had this time to get ready for the fall, where we knew it was still going to be here, where scientists have been saying there's going to be a second wave of spikes. So folks have been kind of amping up for these with contingency plans. Before I get to that, I want to make sure that our audience remembers, if you have any questions for Gustavo or Ed, please put them into the chat. We'll try to get those out as soon as we can, some responses if you have questions about the labor management initiative or what they're seeing around the state or what's working. But let's jump to summer, fall, as we started to rebuild our school year to have it look more normal, if you will. What was happening then with labor? What's happening now? You certainly mentioned PPEs and things like that. But share some more about our reality now and what is working.
Well, a good example actually comes from a district we started working with in 2015, Dinuba Unified out in the Central Valley, who initially started with, really tense, really toxic labor relations, and has been engaged with the Labor Management Initiative over the last 5 years. I bring that up because in a case study kind of sort of research-based story that we did, and I think we're going to pop that into the chat here so people can see it. It really gives people an example of, how did they manage through COVID, right? What happened when, this district sort of approached, what got thrown at them, and how have they addressed sort of this issue of reopening? What we saw was there was a ton of, and this isn't a surprise to, I'm sure, your members, right? Contingency plans, right? We've got plan A, B, C, D, E, and F, right? Yep. And, which is hugely frustrating because, that's so atypical from the way district planning processes work, right? Which are very long, very, we're going to introduce this initiative, the following year, whereas now suddenly people have to be forming agile teams and ready at a drop of a hat, whether it's because the county health department says you're closing down or you're opening up or you've got this flexibility or not. So I point people to take a look at that case study, and it gives you some good examples. But what we saw, and we saw districts that had previously been working on and been really intentional about building relationships, had built structures around lots of communication, right? Joint committees to look at a whole bunch of things. And when we talk about joint committees, it's sort of like labor and management working on specific things. They probably had, in many cases, they had an existing joint committee on the budget, on special ed, on a variety of things. And they were able to sort of use that kind of agile approach in order to, just on the fly, start to come up with problem solving, problem solving at the school site level with principals and building reps, problem solving in terms of, how labor and management at the district level we're going to approach things. We can't overemphasize the issue of really, the importance of communication, of bringing in folks to have conversations early on. The work that we do should not just live in the HR department within the district. It really is about building relationships on a lot of levels, being really intentional about calendaring. How often is labor and management going to meet and talk and work together? That should be continuously and within a structure. And we've helped people through both the research that we're aware of and the examples of what we've seen in districts. So in places that were able to work together, they focused on regular meetings, whether that was creating side letters to address issues that got thrown at them unexpectedly, or the things that they could see were coming up and they knew would be a problem. How do you deal with staffing when some folks have, pre-existing conditions or, are immunocompromised or a family member is, and they could start to work together crafting language to address that.
No, those lessons are so important to the field. I'm glad you put that link up there because, people know that it's possible. But when they see it in action, it becomes probable, right? It moves out of this realm of fiction. And I think it gives people hope and inspires them to do the work. You've each hit on some of this, but I want to dive in as we move along tonight to, there is no silver bullet, but there are some things that work. And Gustavo, you do this work, you see it out there. For you, what are some of those keys to making sure that these labor management relationships foster the outcomes that our students and communities deserve?
Yeah, I think you hit on one of the main ones. It's organizational change doesn't happen by mandate. Instead, it happens by modeling. Really, people like to see that the district leadership is really doing and acting in the same way that they're really pushing it out. and really management creating more opportunities to listen, more opportunities for labor to really play a larger role in driving quality. And so those two factors, we have seen the lessons, or have been our lessons that we learned. There's no silver bullet, but there is more opportunities for teams at the site level to really contribute and into conversations and be included, and with that, really building a diverse team. What does a diversity in a team look like to you? And have those conversations. It might not just be, like Ed mentioned before, just your labor leaders, just your management leaders. What does diversity look like for you in your district? And really this not living, if you're building a labor management team, not living just in HR, this is a whole system change. How do we think about it, both the school sites, at the PLCs? How do we think about it in the district level? And really building that connection between precision and trust, ensuring that you have both of those key elements. And we're not just talking about scores and data, and we're not just talking about trust. Instead, we're talking about how to build those systems together and really then model them. And those were some key lessons that we learned, that the most effective teams are really building out. And really trying to make sure that they don't snap back into old ways of doing things. As we learn through the crisis, what are we learning that we did not completely do well? How do we build up the issues of equity and not snap back to what we knew, but instead how we build better, right? And I hate to take the building better slogan, but building back better, really, and thinking how to avoid the similar things that we weren't doing well, and having those honest conversations, I think, were critical.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I got to tell you, if I were, and again, I said I'm biased. I help on the steering team, but if I were a superintendent, I'd want to participate in the LMI. I totally would, and I saw great benefit in the ABC's West Coast Labor Management Forum that they put on. It's great. It's great stuff. Ed, we had a question from Amy about using these conversations at LMI to work on or rebuild teacher evaluation, not for contractual reasons, but to improve practice. Let me ask you this, and then I'll give you the last question as well. Is that something that the California Labor Management Initiative is working on? And if not, what are you working on? What's coming down the pike for us?
Well, I mean, we've seen some good examples of kind of collaborative ways of building evaluation systems. I think one of the best is actually out of San Juan Unified, and they have again, it's evaluation connected to how do we improve and how do we support staff to get better. That's really where we want to get focused. It's also about, having hard conversations about, how do we do things in such a way that, the union, it feels like this is a value add for us. This isn't a gotcha. And management feels like, hey, the unions are participating around improvement processes. They're not just, out there to say no. They're out there to say, hey, we've got some ideas. What do you think of this? So I would point people specifically on that issue to San Juan Unified, actually. I think coming down the pike, some of the big issues, I mean, obviously, how do we do distance learning? How do we actually make that work? I think we're going to be, in distance learning for a good long chunk of this year. Some districts are going to go back and forth. Whatever the new normal looks like, it's going to include the ability to be more effective at online learning. And there's no question that takes the insights of practitioners on the ground, which includes, teachers and your labor leaders from teachers' local unions. And it also means management needs to work closely with them around, what worked and what didn't, and not it didn't work, and therefore let's look at who to blame, but how do we build the psychological safety into the system so people can say, what works and how do we support each other and learn from what we prototyped, what we tried, and, let's work on this together, because that's a shared goal that both labor and management have.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think I saw Stan Rose, a comment from him come up. I wanted to love it, but I'm doing this so I can't. But I think he's right on, as he often is. The last question we always ask is, what gives you hope? We want to end each week with hope. And And I'll tell you that having seen this work, I have hope that we can use this model to do great things in the state. I've been at tables with folks that describe the dysfunction they used to live in, and how they've worked intentionally. And they've done they've done the hard work to get to where they are now. But now there's trust, and now there's a conversation, and now they're able to talk about the things that each of them wants to talk about, which is how do we improve outcomes for students, because they've moved past the other stuff. And so that gives me hope as a system. Gustavo, what gives you hope, man?
You know, it's the grace. It's the grace we're giving each other as we're both learning, right? Both the teacher and the student, whatever that is. I remember stumbling through the summit. We tried so hard to use different Zoom and other online platforms. But when we were stumbling at it, the grace that we saw from educators just saying, don't worry about it. We got this. We know what it's like. And so as educators, we give each other this grace and patience. And that gives me hope, because we know that we're all learning together, and we're all kind of struggling in a way to really adapt to the new virtual learning. So we appreciate really, or what gives me hope is to see that grace come back to me and of course afford it to others.
Love it. Thank you. Ed, how about you? What gives you hope, my friend?
I think, educators are just extremely resourceful people, frankly, and they're adaptive. And while we know that labor and management have their role to play, and oftentimes they're going to be oppositional, that's okay. I think what gives me hope is seeing, things like labor management teams come together and recognize there's different ways to operate. I want to point people to a webinar we have coming up this Thursday on, leading through uncertainty and prioritizing through uncertainty. I would hope people participate in some of those. Feel free to reach out to us. Gustavo and we're happy to provide support for districts. We encourage you to have some conversations. We can point you to some great research on building trust in school systems, and to be a resource where we can to help people manage through what is the most challenging time in their career, probably in their lives. So I'm also hopeful that, just building on the relationship with AXA and with US and all of your, amazing leaders out there that really want to work collaboratively, that there's a great opportunity to improve the dynamic and change the outcomes for students in California.
Well, we're always at AXA, that, willing to lean in and collaborate and work with folks to make a difference. We got into this work to do just that. And we know we can't do it without the relationship piece. I want to thank you too for offering help, and anyone that's still on the broadcast tonight, he just said, get a hold of them. They'll help you. I know they do that all the time, and they don't even always have to charge. I mean, they can't give everything away for free, but they really have helped folks for free. So get a hold of them and tap into this resource, for heaven's sakes. I want to thank Ed and Gustavo. I want to thank the CD Foundation, the California Labor Management Initiative, for taking time out tonight. Our last bit of hope, we're highlighting some of the students who have won awards this year for Every Student Succeeding. And tonight we're going to share the AXA Region 2 winner, who is Maisie Bishop, and she's from the Grass Valley area at Arete Charter Academy. So let's learn more about Maisie tonight.
Her name is Maisie Hope, because just the prospect of her gave us so much hope. I started silent labor in the middle of the night. I kept telling the nurses, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong.
I get a call saying, heading to the hospital right now. She's going into labor.
She was already on her way out. So within 8 minutes, they had me prepped and in the OR, and she was out, and she was so tiny that they don't even give them, there's no chance to breathe. There's no possible way she could breathe. So she was intubated while she was still inside of me. Every second we got with her was going to be a privilege. When my friends heard that she was born, they would call and they'd start crying on the phone, and I'd say, stop right now. I'd just answer and say, hello, this is Sarah, Maisie's here, and we're celebrating. And that's kind of been her story, that every minute we have with her is the best gift.
So tell me what you did here. How did you get these numbers for why?
She first was diagnosed with ADD. Then we went by her pediatrician. Then we got into the Mind Institute, and it was dyslexia, dysgraphia, dysmorphia. She had sensory processing. She had auditory processing. So those were kind of the big ones, which are, one of those is really, really big. And you put all of those together, and those are really, really big.
From the second I really walked into school till now, I was labeled as the troubled kid, the one who didn't understand stuff and that needed extra help. And that was a very stressful thing for me because all I wanted to do was fit in.
I just hope that she finds a place where she always feels that she belongs, that she struggled with that a little bit in her life, and contentment. And I think when she feels safe and she feels that she won't be bullied in any way, I think that'll happen.
I'm just grateful to be alive and that I can see everything that life has to offer and how amazing it is. All of the odds were stacked against me all the time, and to be here really makes sense now.
I love my whole family, and I love my son, and I love my husband, but Maisie just is magic. She just is. I say this all the time. She's the best thing on earth, and she is. She is the best thing on earth.
Well, congratulations, Maisie. I too am grateful to be alive and inspired by your courage. Folks, you can see all of these at our AXA Leadership Summit. Make sure you get registered. In the meantime, stay safe, be well. We'll see you next week on Common Purpose, Uncommon Times.